Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Conrad. I'm the founder of ManTherapy, and I'm so pleased to be chatting today with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jed Diamond. Jed has committed his entire career to working with men. He's published, I believe, a dozen books, a couple of them are international bestsellers, and all of his life's work and the work that he's published and his Men Alive website that he founded many years ago continue to just explore the topic of men's mental health. And his observations and his contributions on that topic are enormous. And I wanted to start our series for our ManTherapy provider network and to start a series and invite Jed in to talk about his journey and also to talk about the critical issue of training more therapists who are specialized, qualified, and passionate about working with men, and how different and special it is for uh, men and the treatment that they're provided, and what is gender specific about that. Um, Also, I want to explore with Jed about how important it is for therapists and healers to prioritize taking care of their own mental health so they can be there for their loved ones and for their patients. And so Jed and I are going to explore a few of these topics, but I wanted to start with just sharing a story about how Jed and I first crossed paths. You know, we launched ManTherapy as a men's mental health campaign way back in 2012. And there's been so many positive impacts and ripples that this little campaign has created. And one of them led to the shores of Dr. Jed Diamond and the work that he's doing. And he heard about ManTherapy and reached out. And so, Jed, I'll let you first start just by telling that story about how and where you first encountered ManTherapy, and then we'll take some time to get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, well, we will talk a little bit more as we get into it about my involvement in the field, but I've been doing it a long time and I'm always looking for new ways in which we can provide better services for men and their families. And because I've been in the field for a long time, I'm often contacted with new things, new programs. And as you well know, for a long time, men's health, men's mental health was not addressed at all, or it was addressed very minorly. And so when something new, as I heard about ManTherapy, it just, the name, first of all, said a lot and says a lot. And I was very intrigued and then went to the site and saw how it was done. And I was very excited because it not only was giving new information and helpful information, which often was not there, but it was doing it in a way that was humorous, engaging, taking men where they were, and was different than anything else that I had seen. And so I wanted to know who did this, who is this Dr. Mahogany, and who's behind this. And I reached out and found out you were behind all of this in your company, and got very interested to hear more about what you were doing.
Yeah, and I feel so grateful that you reached out because of hearing about ManTherapy, and it allowed me to learn about you and your work and your network. And just over the past 2 years that we've known each other, the collaborations that we've been able to engage in is living proof that there are strength in numbers, and we could do more work and better work together than on our own. And so I think it's great to be able to now have you share a little bit more of your story with the therapists that are a part of our network. And so I would love it, Jed, if you could just maybe give a brief history of your journey and how you got to where you are in the work that you do.
Sure, sure, Joe. Well, it really started for me on a somewhat specific date. I say November 21st, 1969. I held my newborn son in my hand and made a promise to him that I would be a different kind of father than my father was able to be for me, and to do everything I could to create a world where men were fully healthy, healed, and involved with their family throughout their lives. And 2 years later, our daughter Angela was born, and I started Men Alive as a vehicle for reaching out and letting others know about this field of men's health and men relationship. And with two new children, it became very evident to me that they were different and that there were male-female differences that emerged over time. And I think parents who have children, I think, know that, feel that, but there had not been much recognition in the healthcare field that there were gender differences in all kinds of ways. And I met quite some time ago a cardiologist, Marianne J. Legato, and she's a was studying what was different about the ways in which women experience heart attacks. And it was assumed when she went to medical school, I went to medical school for a time, that there were no sex differences except obvious ones in, our genital organs and so on. And yet she had found that women who were diagnosed with stomach uh, flu or symptoms that were not indicative of a heart attack later were turned out to have risk for a heart attack. And so in 1997, she founded the Foundation for Gender Specific Medicine because she wanted to first study what we needed to do to treat women. And that then developed into a center that looked at what was different about not only women's health, but men's health. And she wrote a book called Eve's Rib, The New Science of Gender Specific Medicine. And when I read that, it was like a lot of what I intuitively knew, what I had felt about men's work came together. And I like to just quote her from the book. She said, "Everywhere we look, the two sexes are startlingly and unexpectedly different, not only in their internal function, but in the way they experience illness." Now, when she first started, she was focused on women's health. That was the area that she felt was neglected. But she recognized very early that men's health was neglected and still is. And what she said, and I think this is important, she said the premature death of men is the most important and neglected health issue of our time. Just let that sink in for a minute. I mean, this was profound, still is, as still a whole lot of energy is not being focused on men's health. So that was her work. And then I learned about the work of another researcher who is very instrumental in the field of gender specific understanding and medicine. His name is David C. Page. He's an MD also and professor of biology at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So high level stuff. And what he said, and again, I want to be real specific about the quote. He says there are 10 trillion cells in the human body, and every one is sex specific. I mean, let that sink in for a minute. Every cell, all 10 trillion cells are sex specific. He goes on to say, we've had a unisex vision of the human genome. And he said, men and women are not equal in our genome, and men and women are not equal in the face of disease. Again, let that just sink in for a minute. And he says, so all, and this is still a quote from him, so all your cells know on a molecular level whether they are XX or XY. In other words, every cell is sex specific, and we know then all these differences are not just in our sexual organs. The differences affect every cell in our body. And I had seen this clinically in studying depression. Uh, my father had been depressed. That was the disconnect that I had growing up. He'd taken an overdose of sleeping pills, went into a mental hospital. And I was very interested in what was different about male depression versus female depression, because we know that men more than women as a group die sooner and live sicker of many diseases, most diseases, in fact, but specifically around suicide and depression. And I wrote a book that looked and studied this called the irritable male syndrome, understanding and managing the four key causes of depression and aggression, because my research showed that there were differences in, again, the symptoms of depression. So many men were not being diagnosed, and we were losing men to suicide because we didn't know, we didn't recognize the symptoms. So all of this together, was my real understanding that gender specific healthcare really is the healthcare of the future. We're trying to individualize healthcare, and the probably the most significant individualization starts with recognizing the sex specific differences between men and women.
Very good. I think it's becoming more and more apparent and I think it's a realization that's past its time. But I think it's also led to what you and I have talked about, in your opinion, is a real shortage in the coming years that will be able to meet the demand of men seeking support. Why is it so important right now to recruit, train, support therapists who are uniquely qualified and specialized in working with men?
Well, first of all, we've never had enough trained professionals in mental health at all. So that's a thing I think everybody would recognize and understand. But we also recognize increasingly that since there are recognized sex differences, in Dr. Legato's work over, now since 1997, and there are institutes all over the world now that are examining gender specific medicine, broadly speaking, that it would be, I think, naive and malpractice if we didn't recognize that we needed trained therapists that were females to be able to address some of the female specific health issues that women have. And yet we're not training enough men who are both cognizant in gender specific medicine and trained in men's health. So that's one general thing. Specifically, there are shortages in men being trained in the healthcare professions and the mental health professions, particularly. And Richard V. Reeves is one of the emerging experts in this field. And he recently started a foundation for the Institute for Boys and Men. And he's done research, very interesting and very important, that looks at the differences in people that are trained social workers and psychologists in the field of mental health. And I want to again quote some of his statistics because they are startling. So he says, and I quote, the mental health needs are pervasive among men, yet the share of men meeting those needs in mental health professions is low and declining. And he has a number of takeaways that underline, pay attention. So one, men account for only 18% of social workers and 20% of psychologists in the field. 18% of social workers and 20% of psychologists. Two, he says the representation of men in these mental health professions has halved in recent decades, down from the male share of 38% in social work and 68% in psychology in 1968. 1968 happens to be the year I graduated in social work. So even then, there weren't a lot of men in the field, and now it's gotten even less in social work and psychology. And the last thing he said is this downward trend looks set to continue. The male share of recipients of master's degrees and above is 20% in psychology and 12% in social work. And men in psychology are on average older than women. So in other words, we are not training men to come into the field, and we need many more men that are trained in gender specific health and medicine. And this is, a tragedy of huge proportions and an opportunity of huge proportions that we hope to be able to fill because we know the need, we know how to train men, we know what these gender specific issues are. And so, what I've been doing at Men Alive and what you've been doing with ManTherapy is beginning to raise awareness and begin to get people into the field and be able to give them the supports and the services that they need to provide the care that is essential.
Jed, I want to create an opportunity to talk about, therapists that specialize in working with men do not have to be men themselves. We want a network that, is very diverse and has a fair amount of female practitioners who are trained and specialize in working with men. And so I want to just create some time and space. That I don't want to misconstrue what you've been saying about training men and the men falling off, that this is limited to men or that we think men therapists are the only solution. So I wanted to give you some time and space to just talk about
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think definitely that's true. As you well know, when I invited a group of colleagues to join me with what we wanted to focus on, a moonshot for mankind, I invited both men that were working in the field and women that were working in the field because I recognized that it wasn't just men who were working in the field of men's health, but women as well. And we need everybody. I mean, clearly, men have worked in fields that have been helpful to women and vice versa, and we want to continue that. So these are vital issues, and we need everybody who both is desires, because here's the bottom line with this for me, is that we really can't talk about women's health and men's health as separate entities. Men and women are connected. Many of us have women in our families. We have wives, we have, daughters, we have relatives that are cross-sex, so that we all need to be cognizant of gender-specific health care. And we definitely want to include women in the field as we are developing gender-specific men's health issues.
Jed, let's talk about reasons why therapists don't always remember to take care of themselves. Can you just talk a little bit about, what tends to get in the way of that self-care of practitioners?
Well, I think there's a number of issues. Two that I've found personally that stand out for me is that many people go into the field, and I'll, be honest saying I did, not just because I wanted to help others, but because, I wanted to help my family. I thought if I could learn about these issues, I could help men like my father. And very frankly, I could help myself because I think many of us in the field, and again, I'll be honest about myself, have had our own challenges with mental health issues. My father turned out to be depressed and be bipolar, and I also, followed suit with that and had issues myself and have talked about it and written about it. So I think there's a lot of us that have had trauma in our families, in our lives, and as a result, we have a tendency sometimes to deny, which I did for a long time, my own issues because I pushed them away. I didn't want to think I had problems. It took a long time for me to reach out for help. And the other side of it is when we do reach out and are helping others, we do it with such passion because it's personal, that we tend to put others' needs ahead of our own. And it's also, I think, part of how many of us grew up in families where we experienced trauma. We became very self-sufficient. Took care of ourselves. We got very good at taking care of others. And those tendencies, all wonderful and good for helpers, but there's a tendency at times, and I certainly have suffered from this, to put other needs, to get overwhelmed, to not take care of myself, to be too busy and do it always for others and neglect myself. And those are, there's other things which we'll talk about, but those are kind of the highlight too that I found true in my own life.
Yeah, I'm sure many listeners could probably relate to that as well. Talk a little bit about why it's important for therapists to think about and prioritize their own mental health and well-being.
Well, geez, there's so many good reasons. I think obviously we all know it up here, in our mind, the we're on the airplanes flying somewhere and the announcements come to in case the cabin depressurization, the mask will drop down. Be sure and put your own mask on first before you try to help your children or anybody else. So we know the concept, heal or heal thyself first and then help others. But the truth is, we don't always, do that very well. And again, I want to offer another quote from a colleague in the field. Mark Olfson is an MD, Master in Public Health, Professor of Epidemiology at Columbia University. And he says, as quote again, healthcare workers compared with non-healthcare workers have greater risks for mental health problems and long-term work absences due to mental disorders and are at increased risk of suicide compared with workers in other fields. So we are at risk. He recognizes that. And he goes on to say, and I quote, more than 145,200 clinicians, 145,200 exited the healthcare workforce in 2021 and 2022. And that trend is continuing as problems in the world that we're facing increase. So we're not only uh, not having enough people that are trained, we're also losing people who are trained in the healthcare professions because we're not taking care of ourselves and each other. And I know that my own, again, situation was like that. I didn't take care of myself. It led to, problems not only if I wasn't taking care of myself, I wasn't taking care of others. And I think it really speaks to the need for communities of healthcare professionals who can, one, be supported to take care of themselves and help to take care of themselves so that we can do our job, as you say, to take care of our families and take care of the people who we're in business to serve and we long to serve and we want to serve.
Jed, what advice would you offer to practitioners in how they can prioritize their own mental health? Do you have any suggestions or tips or tools that you might recommend to help therapists stay strong and healthy and better able to serve their patients?
Yeah, there's a lot that we can do. And I have a colleague that I wanted again to offer her expertise. Her name's Pamela Weibel. She's again an MD, but the fact that these are MDs, I'm quoting, there are many of us in the field. I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD. And but all of us in the healthcare field, I think, are facing similar issues. And this is a quote from her, Pamela Weibel. Uh, she says, I've been a doctor for 32 years. I've not lost a single patient to suicide. I've lost only colleagues, friends, lovers, all male physicians to suicide. Why? And she goes on then to talk about some of the reasons. And suicide obviously is the most tragic loss that any of us could experience. But we lose people in many other ways short of suicide. And here are some of the things. Again, these are quotes from her about some of the reasons. And I quote them because, in answer to your question, we have to really get not only in our heads, but in our hearts and our bodies, the reasons that this problem goes on. So she says, our greatest joy is the patient relationship. Most of us are burned out, overworked, and exhausted. So I just let these sink in because a lot of these were true for me. We spend too little time with our families. Workaholics are admired as healers. Many function in survival mode. We're not supposed to make mistakes. Caring for sick people can make you sick if you don't take care of yourself. Seeing too much pain and not enough joy is unhealthy. Crying for help is seen as weakness. Many healthcare professionals are in denial about the high rate of depression and suicide in physicians and other healthcare professionals. Many face marital distress and go through divorce. Many have addictions to drugs and alcohol. Many have economic hardship and unbearable debt. Many have stress-related mental illness. We are human, but we often are expected to be superhuman. These are her quotes, and I think each of us can ask ourselves, which ones have I experienced? Which ones are true for me? And so some of the things that I think we can do that I know I've done in my own life and I recommend to others is one, remember why we got into this work. You know, it really was to be helpful. And I think we really have to recognize we can't be helpful unless we can take care of ourselves as well as we often take care of the people that we see as clients. That's one thing. Um, we need to take care of our own families because they're kind of the bedrock of our support system. And so many I hear from colleagues, you know, who I know they're doing great work taking care of others, but their own families are coming apart. You know, I have 5 children and 17 grandchildren, 2 great grandchildren, and I've had to learn over the years to be sure my own backyard, my own loved ones are being taken care of. So that's a significant issue. Um, I think we need to accept that we all make mistakes. That's a hard one for me. You know, I had a hard time when I'd make a mistake. I'd feel so bad, so guilty, so shamed that I didn't want to accept. And we make mistakes and we need to accept that and be good to ourselves. I think we need to support each other. Often we are either in competition with other healthcare professionals for clients, or we're, you know, competitive, particularly men. I'll be honest. I think it's not just a male trait, but I think men that I've known, myself included, have been competitive. So I think we need to recognize that and address that. And I think we have to, maybe this could be the biggest one, to accept our own vulnerability, to really accept that not only are we inherently vulnerable because we're male, which is true, but we also, all of us in the healthcare professions are vulnerable because we are working in places where there's a lot of pain and suffering and all the things that go with that. And I guess the final thing that I would say we can do and need to do is be part of a community. So many of us are so busy doing our practices. And even if we're in a quote, a practice, we're working with others, often we're not really in a place where we can not only be collaborative, but can be vulnerable, can share what's really going on with us, can get help for the things we're doing. So those are I guess the things I would offer myself and all of us that are in the profession that I think would be helpful.
Those are really great gems of wisdom. I appreciate you sharing that with us, Jed. And I think that that's part of what we're building here too, is a community of providers who believe in this work and who want to grow their practice. We're trying to, provide a connection point to men seeking services and therapists who are qualified and specialize in working with men. We want to help practitioners grow their practice, protect their hourly rates, and really have a community where they can come together and share information and support one another in the work that we're all doing. So I appreciate you taking some time and visiting with me and lending some of your advice to other practitioners out there. I'm sure it is going to help a great deal. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, and uh, I wanted to just close with a thought because
Yeah.
there's a context that I think is important that we're all facing, which is that the world that we are in now and the world that we are facing is going to get more difficult. This isn't, a time where we can say, as we all have going through COVID, going through the, conflicts and systems breaking down, hoping to get back to normal where things were easier. But the truth is, I think that things are going to get more difficult. So it really, I think, requires more of a coming together and support system. And I just end with a quote that kind of resonates with me. I've heard it before, but it still feels alive for me. Václav Havel, the Czech statesman, author, poet, playwright, and dissident, said this. He says, I think there are good reasons for suggesting that the modern age has ended. Today, many things indicate that we are going through a transitional period when it seems that something is on the way out and something else is painfully being born. It is as if something were crumbling, decaying, and exhausting itself, while something else, still indistinct, were arising from the rubble. And I think what we need, and again, I'll quote one of my colleagues, Meg Wheatley, says that we need islands of sanity, places where we can, in a sense, get out of the hubbub of craziness that, is part of our world, where we can come together as practitioners and people seeking help to be able to, talk together, be able to be vulnerable, to be able to plan what we can do collectively together that will make a difference. Because we really want and need to be here for each other because something good is coming. I think we feel something really wonderful is going to replace some of the craziness that's been going on. But we need good, healthy people if we're going to bring that about.
Yeah. Well said, Jed. Thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you around the bend soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, my friend.